You were absent. Not just in moments, but in the silence that screamed louder than words. She cried alone. Not because she wanted to, but because no one was there to catch the fall. Have you ever felt invisible to someone who promised to stay? The space where warmth should be was cold. And in that emptiness, the truth whispered, absence is not just physical. It is the wound that never heals. What happens when the person you needed the most disappears from your life, leaving only echoes of broken promises? This is not just her story. It is the story of every silence left unanswered. You were absent, and she cried alone. She waited. Not for a grand gesture, not for words that would erase the pain, just for presence. But presence became a ghost, drifting farther away each day, leaving behind only silence and shadows. She learned to cry in the dark, when no one could see. The cracks forming inside her. Every tear was a question without an answer. Every night a battlefield where hope fought despair. You weren't just physically gone. You were absent from her mind, absent from her heart, absent from the very spaces where memories should have lived. The weight of absence is heavier than any betrayal because it's invisible, unspoken, yet it breaks you down slowly, like rust eating metal from within. She loved in a void. She gave without receiving. She hoped without certainty. And the worst part, she blamed herself, wondering if her tears were too loud, if her needs were too much. The world around her moved on. People smiled, laughed, lived. But she was trapped in a silence that echoed louder than any voice. What is it like to be forgotten by the one who promised to never leave? How deep can loneliness cut when it's caused not by distance, but by absence, by a presence that should be there, but isn't? This isn't just a story of loss. It's a confession of how absence can kill love slowly, how it can make a soul feel invisible in a world full of noise. She cried alone, because sometimes the loudest screams come from the quietest places. Absence isn't always a choice. Sometimes it's cowardice. Sometimes it's distraction. And sometimes it's simply indifference. But to the one left behind, reasons don't matter. Because pain doesn't ask for context. It just exists. She cried alone not because she was weak, but because there was no one left to be strong for. The absence carved itself into her routines. No calls. No messages. Just time stretching endlessly like a hallway with no doors. You were gone, but worse than gone. You were emotionally unreachable. And that kind of absence is the most violent. It's easy to say, I'll be there. It's harder to actually stay when things become uncomfortable. Messy, human. But presence means showing up even when it's inconvenient. Especially then. She didn't need perfection. She didn't ask for someone who had all the answers. She just needed someone who wouldn't vanish when she broke, when she shook, when her world fell apart. But you left her to hold it all, the chaos, the fear, the weight. You left her to become the strong one. The quiet one. The one who survives in silence. Do you know what it does to a soul to be both the storm and the shelter? That kind of absence. It doesn't leave bruises. It leaves voids. And in those voids, she learned to build walls. To stop expecting. To stop hoping. Because every time she reached out, there was no hand reaching back. She cried alone, not just once, but over and over, in moments no one saw, in corners of nights that felt endless. Her tears weren't dramatic. They were quiet. Silent. Heavy. The kind of crying that dries up on the outside but floods the inside. You were absent. And that changed everything. There was a time when she believed in promises. When your words felt like shelter. She memorized your voice like a song, thinking it would always be there, soft, certain, near. But then the silence came. And it stayed. At first, she made excuses for you. Maybe you were busy. Maybe something came up. Maybe this is just a phase. She held on to maybes like lifelines. But maybe turned into never. Days passed. Then weeks. And she started to realize you weren't coming back. Not really. Your body might return, but your soul had already left. She sat on the floor once, staring at her phone, watching it stay still. That tiny, glowing screen, so powerful in its stillness, told her more about your absence than any goodbye could. You didn't even leave with words. You just disappeared from the spaces where she needed you most. She learned how absence doesn't always slam the door. Sometimes it leaves it open just enough for hope to slip through and haunt her. That was the worst part. You didn't leave fully. You left just enough to keep her waiting. She stopped asking for help. Stopped reaching out. Because every unanswered message became a mirror, reflecting how little she mattered. She could scream in that silence and still feel unheard. Because you had already turned the volume down on her existence. Loneliness is not just being alone. It's being surrounded by the idea of someone, but never truly touched by their presence. She would lie awake at night, wondering what was wrong with her. Was she too needy? Too emotional? Too much? She began to fold into herself, slowly, quietly, until even her reflection looked like a stranger. She stopped smiling in photos. Stopped listening to music. Stopped trusting warmth. Every moment of your absence rewrote her identity. She went from being someone's person to being nobody's priority. And in that erasure, something inside her died. But there's a point where pain becomes transformation. A moment when the weight of being abandoned starts to shift from something that crushes you to something that builds you. She sat in the dark long enough to realize no one was coming to save her. And in that silence, something powerful woke up. Not rage. Not revenge. But self. A quiet decision to stop waiting. To stop bleeding for someone who couldn't even see the wounds. It wasn't fast. Healing never is. But over time, she started breathing differently. Started walking differently. She spoke less, but meant more. She laughed less, but when she did, it was real. She learned to become the presence she never received. Not for others. For herself. Because absence taught her something presence never could. When no one shows up for you, you must become the one who does. And so, slowly, the tears stopped being plays. They became release. Not of love, but of illusion. She forgave the silence. Not because it deserved it, but because she deserved peace. And now, when she cries, it's not from abandonment, it's from the weight she no longer carries. You were absent. She cried alone. But now, she no longer waits by the door. You were there, but you never really saw her. She begged for presence in a language you never cared to learn. You taught her silence, then blamed her for becoming quiet. She broke in places you never noticed because you weren't looking. She stopped asking because hope became humiliating. You turned your absence into a punishment. She cried in rooms you used to fill. You gave her loneliness and expected her to stay grateful. Now you miss the version of her that only existed when she was breaking for you. But that version is gone, and so is the girl who waited. She no longer looks back. Not because the past didn't hurt, but because it no longer holds her hostage. Absence taught her more than presence ever did. It showed her who disappears when love demands effort. It revealed who only shows up when it's easy. And it forced her to meet the one person who would never leave, herself. She stopped romanticizing suffering. Stopped believing that loving harder would make someone stay. She realized you can give someone your heart, but if they are not willing to hold it, they'll drop it without even noticing the sound it makes when it hits the floor. There's strength in staying, but there's power in leaving. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away from the silence that was never meant to keep you safe. She cried alone. But now, her solitude is sacred. Not empty, full. Full of lessons. Full of self. Full of everything you never gave her. You were absent. That is your legacy. But her story, it doesn't end in abandonment. It ends in resilience. You may look back one day and realize what you lost. But by then, she'll be far. Not bitter. Not angry. Just beyond reach. Because she built herself in the ruins you left behind. And now she belongs to no one but herself. If this touched something silent inside you, don't let it stay silent. Share this with someone who needs to. Remember their worth. Or watch it again, not for answers, but to hear the voice you've been quieting for too long.